Welcome everybody. My name's Rob Cullis. I run Channel Talent. It's a series of webinars, video conferences for schools and colleges, which are designed to inform and hopefully inspire you around some of the fantastic choices that are out there for you, but also to support some of your existing studies and some of your existing interests. And we're absolutely delighted to be working with Aberystwyth University today. And I'd like to introduce Professor Milja Kurki, who's going to give us a talk today on climate change and what political ideologies have to do with it. So it should be a fascinating talk. I know, Milja, it's going to be quite interactive as well. So I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you very much for your time. And as you need anything as we go through, just let me know. But thank you, Milja, and over to you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Rob. Hello, everybody. I hope you're well today. Can you hear me okay, first of all?
You are coming through. Yeah, you're coming through clearly. And I think, yeah, there's a yes on the chat.
Excellent. That's what we like to see. So what I'm going to try next then is put these PowerPoints on and see if that works. That's the next step. How's that looking?
So they're coming through. I'll just indicate if anyone's on the browser and they can't see Milja now that they're looking at the slides, then you just go to the, in blue jeans this is, you go to the left-hand side and there's a slider and you can change the relative size of Milja to the slides. But yes, Milja, they're coming through clearly.
Super, great. Okay, then I think we'll get started. And we have some organizational things to talk about in the first instances, but that would be rude to talk about before I introduce myself. So my name is Milja Kurki. As you might suspect, that name comes from outside of this country, the UK context. So I come from Finland originally, but I have been here for 23 years or so. I came here as an undergraduate student, starting university in the late 1990s, and then I've stayed, and Brexit allowing, I will stay a bit longer. I work at the University of Aberystwyth University, and in the Department of International Politics. And my interests are in what you might call theoretical analysis of international politics. That is, I'm interested in the ways in which we look at the world, how we conceptualize the world, how the world appears to us. Now, for some of you, that might sound a little bit abstract and somehow irrelevant to everyday political concerns, but I would like to suggest that it's quite the opposite. So hopefully, even by the end of the day, you'll have a sense of why it's very puzzling and interesting to look at the different conceptions that people have of the world around them. That is, in fact, what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about political ideologies and put them in the context of climate change and think about questions of how climate change and the challenges that it involves appears to us quite differently depending on where we look at them or which ideological lenses we look at the problem through. So that's the subject of the discussion today. If you have any questions at any point, just email me. I put my email in the slides and you'll get the slides from Rob after the discussion today is over. So just email me if you have any queries, questions, propositions, whatever you would like to put to the table. Well, let me see if I can do this. Let me see if I can just get us started on thinking about the subject matter of today. So we're going to be talking about climate change, and we're going to be talking about the various sets of challenges that raises for societies, individuals, states, and also the international community at large. But what we'll try to focus on today, if you don't mind, are particular sets of concerns around kind of political challenges of climate change. So a lot of us know a lot already about the kind of scientific facts around climate change. They are somewhat contested, but there is a great deal of consensus between scientists, politicians, general publics around the kind of facts of science, facts of climate change. What we'll talk about today are the political challenges of climate change. That is, why is it difficult to address climate change politically? And in particular, what I'd like to do is put those political ideologies that sometimes in your politics A-level classes, or perhaps your kind of general readings around political ideologies, you might somehow think about political ideologies as dated or something to do with J.S. Mill and Marx, but that was a long time ago, so why should we care about these things? What I try to talk about today are the ways in which political ideologies, old ones, liberalism, Marxism, but also much newer ones. Ecologism, for example, ecological thinking, how they relate to the questions of climate change and how our own perceptions of what is actually even going on around us is dependent on the kind of lenses, the kind of ideological lenses that we put on when we look at the world. So the aim of the session in part is to help you think about how other people think about the world around them when they look at the issue of climate change, but also to help you think through how it is that you think about climate change. I don't know, maybe you're a little bit like me. I'm confused about what I think about climate change. I'm confused about what I think we should do about it. And that is in part because I'm kind of confused about which ideological predilections are actually guiding my own thinking and my own action. And as such, hopefully, thinking about political ideologies and thinking about them in this context will help you kind of personally, as well as in your understandings of how others think about the world. So that's what we'll try to do today. And we'll move in kind of interactive steps, if you don't mind. My personal belief is not in lecturing, so I lecture at universities, but even in my lectures, I'm afraid my students have to participate with me. So today you will also have to participate with me, even though it's through an online interface, which Rob will expertly facilitate for us today. So what we'll do first is we'll start with a little video that just gets you oriented towards climate change and the threat and the challenge that it poses. And we'll get to that in a moment. After that, what we'll do is we'll look at some basic thinking on ideology, basic thinking on theoretical lenses and how they impact on how we look at the world. And then we'll look at liberalism and Marxism in particular, because they are political ideologies that you will have come across and will have to come across in your studies. So we'll think about them a little bit. But then what I'll try to do is not to think about them and talk to you about them, but I'm going to throw it to your corner to start to think through, okay then, how does liberalism relate to climate change and political action around it? How does Marxism relate to climate change and political action around it? And I'll get you guys to think about a task at that point. And then hopefully we'll have a time also to look at some of these kind of alternative, different kinds of political ideologies, perhaps realism, perhaps ecologism, if we have time, but we'll see how we go. So that's how we proceed, and what will happen is that Rob will facilitate the chat on the side. So if you'd like to make a point, I hope many of you will want to come and speak on the microphone too, but maybe if you put a little note in the chat box first to say, I'd like to speak, then Rob will invite you to speak and we'll go on that basis. I actually, at the moment, just to let you know, I can't actually see the chat at the moment. I only see the slides and Rob and myself at the moment. So with that in mind, please use the chat. Don't be afraid to talk. This is an interactive session. It's a university level session, but it's a university level session for everybody. And if you are confused about how university works, it works on the basis of people talking, sharing opinions, sharing expressions and understandings of the world, and then we talk them through. And that's what we do today. So without further ado, let us then get started. And what I wanted to do is get started on some questions around climate change. What are we actually talking about? We know a great deal about climate change, greenhouse gases, sea level rises, changing weather patterns, the kinds of resource scarcities and mobilities of people that they are causing on the planet. Of course, in the context of the coronavirus, we have had various sets of questions raised also about whether viral infections between animals and humans and so on actually are facilitated in different ways in climate change context and so on. Those are unanswered questions in part, but they are some of the kind of facts about climate change. What I'd like us to start with, though, is a kind of a provocative question. I'd like you to please watch a video. This is a video by Philip Kay called Climate Change. What will happen is that Rob will post that link now in your chat box. So if you could please follow that link, post it on your browser and follow the link. What I'd like you to do is to take 4 minutes or so now to watch the video. But as you watch the video, can I also ask you to reflect on the question below here? Despite the many challenges, many calls for action on climate change, why is it so politically challenging to address climate change? As you're thinking on the provocative video, try to think about that question. Just to give you also a hint that it could very well be the video doesn't necessarily give you an answer, but I'd like you to reflect on that question nevertheless. So if we start from there, hopefully we can start to open it up together, and then we'll see where we go. But Rob, would you like to take over there just for a moment?
Yes, absolutely. So the link is available to you. We will start, we'll give you 4 minutes to watch that, and then we'll come back and if you could consider the questions that Milja's raised. So over to you, and we'll give you 4 minutes.
Okay, do you think we might be
Yeah, that was
done?
4 minutes, Milja. Yeah, so back to you, Milja.
Okay. Have you had any notifications of whether there have been difficulties in accessing the video or anything like that?
There was, yeah, all I know is a couple asked where the link was, but getting messages through that they watched it. So yeah, I think back to you, Milja.
Super. Okay, great. So as you will have seen in this video, which is a great evocative video, and it's also a video that is not so dissimilar to many other videos that we see around these topics, around the climate change topic today. It raises a kind of threat scenario for us. It says we've got to do things. It even says at one point, people on this planet have decided to tackle the issue of climate change. It is time for a human solution now. There is only a human solution to this problem. Now, these kinds of calls are very important, I think, on the one hand, but they don't really seem to address the question, what is actually politically challenging about climate change? So we have a lot of calls for action, but not a lot of very specific proposals for how to do and what to do about the question. So I wondered if any of you wanted to share your thoughts about what might be politically so very difficult about actually getting something done around climate change. If you write something in the box to say me, say I want to make a point or something,
Yeah,
and then
I
Rob
mean,
will give you permission to speak.
yeah. So I guess people are thinking about it. So let's go across to Kat. You've got some thoughts, I think.
Right. So obviously there's the massive issue that people still somehow believe that climate change is fake. It's just a hoax. And this lie, this scam is perpetuated by the people who are directly profiting from killing the earth. So you've got all the billionaires, and now as Jeff Bezos is about to become a trillionaire, all funding the destruction of this earth. So you've got that to contend with, which is a massive issue. Politicians don't want to be seen to be making the brutal changes we have to make into a different society, because people are not yet behind that. You know, it's becoming a much more open dialogue because of organizations like XR, who are bringing awareness, but it's still a hugely controversial topic, and the kinds of measures that have to be taken, politicians would receive huge backlash from people if they decided to do that. And as we see, like with the Green Party in the UK, the only parties that are really talking about making effective change are not voted in. So we're at a stalemate. Yeah, that's me done.
Thank you, Kath. That's a fantastic starting point. You've touched on a whole number of issues there, from the basic political controversy of whether the facts even are telling us anything, questions around capitalism, questions around power of the money in these situations, questions around political systems and politicians and their unwillingness to act on this, but potentially perhaps also even the capacity of political structures to deal with an issue.
Definitely. Definitely.
Great points.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
Thank you, Kat. That's excellent, excellent starting point for us. And we've got some other comments coming through, some on Facebook as well. But if I just run through them, Milja, and then maybe you could just sort of comment more broadly on them. But so Andy is mentioning the interaction between government and big business, which I think Kat was alluding to as well. Molly is saying balancing long-term gain in a short-term voter-led democracy. Some interesting aspects there, definitely. Angarad has said, it mentions in the video that it's a global question. It does bring up the question of international cooperation, with each individual country fearing that they might be economically disadvantaged if they take action first, leading to nobody taking as much action as they should, which that was a great comment there. And then Rudy, not all countries will commit to changing policies to be more environmentally friendly. Therefore, the rest of the countries don't want to be left to deal with it, as it will cost them more. And then I think I've got one more for you. We've got a few more. So isn't humans' addiction or humanity's addiction, this is from Facebook, to economic growth the key impediment to effective collective action on climate change? Sustainable way of... Are you all right with me just bombarding you here?
Yeah, go for it.
Are you able to, and then you can maybe come back on some of these points. But a sustainable way of living has only been adapted by a few people on our planet. It is not the norm. and politicians are voted into limited terms, time frames. So I think this relates to Molly as well, what Molly said. It would take a huge taxation and a strip back of our Western lifestyles. Would people vote that through? And that might be interesting in relation to our lockdown and where that might take us. But and one last one, I think, and then I'll come back to you, Milja. We maybe will pause it there and let Milja come back on these. But countries who rely heavily on fossil fuels as their main export, such as those in OPEC, will be less inclined to diversify their energy mix. Therefore, it is hard to reduce climate change when linked to fossil fuels. I'm not sure why I keep saying fuels, but it is fuels, the word, as the economies of these countries rely so heavily on fossil fuels. So, Milja, I don't know if you want to respond to some of those great comments that are coming through.
No, great comments and really important starting gambits for us. And it seems to me that, in a sense, you are not fooled by the type of generic calls for action. You are seeing the problems of this issue. And there are issues really on multiple levels, but also there are issues that arise from, in part, different perceptions about what's actually going on exactly with climate change. So in some of your comments, for example, you can clearly see that, okay, if this is where we start from, this is NASA's projection for the 100 years to 80 years from now in terms of the rise of temperatures. Now, in an image like this, in a sense, what we don't really see, we see the nature of the problem, see the nature of the challenge, but what we don't see is, in a sense, some of the political challenges. And these challenges really only come to us when we start to think about the different ways in which people transpose onto this sort of an image a different set of images. So if you transpose onto that image, this sort of an image, you'll get a sense of what it's like to think about climate change from the point of view of, say, a more nationalistic perspective, where actually we think about states as the key actors, states as the key constituents and holders of political power. Realists also in the study of international politics very much go with this sort of a point of view. In the world, there are multiple states. The world is not uniform. The world is divided, the world is fragmented, and power between the states is also fragmented and divided unequally. In a world of this kind, where the real borders between states are real political factors, addressing climate change becomes very, very difficult. So if we transpose this onto this, all of a sudden we see certain kinds of international problems arising for us, certainly, and they are really important to think about in terms of climate change. But as many of you also importantly commented on, there's also this sort of an image that underpins some people's takes on thinking about climate change. That is, perhaps the world is not politically or organizationally ruled by states at all. Maybe it is not the states, as this image seems to convey. Maybe the world is actually run through corporations, multinational corporations, and this of course is just a selection of things, but what it's trying to express to you is this sense in which transnational corporations actually hold more power than a lot of states, and as a result, to get action through states is a very difficult proposition in the first instance. And what this really is just showing to us is that there isn't a singular understanding of the nature of the problem. There are multiple perspectives on what exactly the problem is, which comes through your analysis through. Maybe it's capitalism. Maybe it's inadequate individual action at home in terms of what we eat and what we consume. Or maybe it's the fact that the markets haven't properly moved towards sustainable energy and sustainable provision of goods for us. The nature of the problem differs. And this is really where, to be honest, we need to think about political ideologies. So if you always thought that political ideologies are just Marx and Mill and the old persons that have been not with us for quite a few hundred years, this is really important because these political ideologies, all they really are, they are kind of conceptual systems through which we image the world and power relations and key actors in it. So in some senses, what I would like to propose to you is that ideologies are a little bit like lenses. different kind of camera lenses, different colored camera lenses, or different kinds of sunglasses, if you wish. And when we put them on, the actual facts of the climate change problem present to us in different kinds of ways. If you put the realist or nationalist glasses on, the states appear. If you put the socialist glasses on, global transnational structures appear. Different kinds of things appear to us as we try to think about climate change. And that's why it's really, really important, I think, to think about political ideologies as we come to the issue of climate change. Ideologies shape our thinking, our perceptions, and also our actions in quite a fundamental way, even if we're not aware of the effects of them on our actions. And also, I should propose this to you, even if your ideological conception of the world is not actually particularly consistent or systematic. So if you're anything like me, you might be a liberal in the morning and an ecologist in the afternoon, a feminist sometime during lunchtime, and something else at another time. And you might actually perceive that in your own thought systems and your own actions in the world, your own political actions in the world, you actually have multiple political ideologies at work at the same time, or kind of transposed upon each other. So that's really why you need to think about political ideologies. However you perceive the problem of climate change is also already filtered through one set of glasses or another. It's almost impossible to look at the world as if it was somehow purely transparent to us. Instead, we look at the world from particular conceptual assumptions, from particular ways of thinking about the key actors, what is actually out there, and so on. And that's what I think we should a little bit try to think about today as we think about the climate change. I think you will find that some of the problems that you've already alluded to tie in exactly to this process now. So let's think about some of these ideological lenses. The key ones that you will have come across and will have had to study at school are liberalism and Marxism or socialism. They have a complex interrelationship, but we don't need to get into that in too much detail. And again, when you study ideologies, my advice for you would be, don't simply think about reading J.S. Mill or reading the compiled works of Karl Marx. Think about the essence of what it is that they're trying to say to us about how we perceive the world. What kind of a world view do they present for us? And here's my very simple kind of take on liberalism and Marxism. And the difference really is this. When I wake up in the morning as a liberal, which I sometimes do, to me, I see around us, and I also perceive myself as an individual that has capacity to use their own reason. I have a capacity to reason about what I do, and I have also an autonomy, a certain amount of autonomy at least, to act in the world. So when I decide to go to the shop, which I don't do very often at the moment, I have certain, freedom of choice in whether I go there and what I do there. I choose what I want to do. When I decide to go to university, I decide to go to a particular university. If I want to go and work somewhere, I go and I choose the kind of nature of work that I engage in. So individuals themselves have power, autonomy, and so also kind of reason, capacity for reason. And as such, they have right to act in the world, to be the key actors in the world. Within liberalism, then, what do institutions do? States, international organizations, and so on. Their role is, in essence, to act as kind of facilitators of individual reasoning individuals to go out and do their things in the world. So in a sense, institutions such as states and international organizations in the international scene, their role is to manage the rational pursuit of interests by individuals. As a result, the whole point of a kind of political interaction in the world is that it is about cooperation, facilitation of cooperation and negotiation between individuals within states, but also if you're a liberal internationalist, of course, what do international institutions do? They facilitate the rational cooperation, rational negotiation of states. In that sense, states are kind of the individual rational actors within a liberal international perspective. So if that's liberalism for you, what is Marxism or socialism? Many of you will know, of course, this answer. And many times when you start to engage with Marxism, the starting point often is the base and the superstructure and the capitalist political economy and so on. But actually, I would propose to you that a much easier starting point for getting your head around Marxism or socialism is actually just to think about how Marxism or socialism thinks about the context in which we work. So for Marxists and socialists, the individuals themselves are not autonomous. And the reason that's the case is that the individuals themselves, indeed, the very idea that there's such a thing called an individual, that in and of itself is a creation of a structure, of a social structure around us. So when I was born and my parents called me Milja and the gender female and so on, there were certain social contextual forces that were defining for me my qualities. Well, kind of in a similar sense, the Marxists also argue that the way in which you come to act in your society, the choices that you make about what you buy or who you vote for or what you do with your daily life, those choices are not actually yours only. They are also social, as in they are defined by the social structural forces that have defined for you a particular role in life. So when I go to the shop and I buy a particular kind of coffee, that choice is not mine, actually. It was already predefined for me by what? The capitalist structure. The capitalist structure has something to do with the way in which we are structured in how we act in the world. That is, for a Marxist, individuals exist in these social structures, and capitalism is an important social structure within those structures. And capitalism is literally just this. It is a way of thinking about the relationship between the owners of goods and facilities to make goods and those that work for those people that have the capacity to produce the goods and sell the goods. And all that capitalism really is it is a social system that makes us work in particular ways in relation to each other. The key thing here for the Marxists is that the workers, they don't just want to go to work. They think that they want to go to work, but actually the workers are defined in a social structure where they don't have capacity to do anything other than to sell their own work capacity to others. So put it in a very simple context. If I stopped working for Aberystwyth University today, I would not be able to put food on the table for my cats or for my partner. In a very simple sense, I cannot subsist, I cannot actually sustain my own biological being without selling my work for somebody. So it might be Aberystwyth University, but if it wasn't Aberystwyth University, it would have to be some other corporations. And that's capitalism for you, in a nutshell. It is simply a system within which we all have to function, both the capitalists and the workers. Everybody functions within it, but crucially, it's a structure that defines our way of looking at the world. Now, the key thing here is, as I'm sure you can already see, you can really see the differences between different ideologies towards political action emerging. Because if for liberals, politics is about negotiation of individuals' interests, for a Marxist, politics is actually not about that. Politics is about shifting the very basis of the way in which the political structure or economic structure or social structure actually should even function. It is structural change that is required in order to deal with a problem. So there are big differences in basic assumptions about what is out there, who am I, what context am I in, but also in terms of literally what kind of a political action should be required for us to do something about something. I've been going on for a little bit. Don't worry, I'll shut up now. This will be, the pretty much last things you get from me. What I want you to do now is maybe, hopefully, reflect on some of the things that I've said and think about the following questions then. So if liberalism and Marxism, say, have very, very different understandings of the individual, of social structure, and also of politics and what political action actually should be, then could we take a few minutes to think about these questions? You can choose one or the other, choose liberalism or choose Marxism, socialism, or you can do both if you are so quick that you can do them both. But what I'd like you to do is just think about these questions from a liberal perspective and think on it. From a liberal perspective, what exactly is politically challenging about climate change? What exactly is the challenge? And as a result then, what kind of political action should be taken from a liberal perspective? And on the other hand, if you're a Marxist, what is the political challenge exactly, and what kind of political action should be taken? If we do, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes or so on this, and then come together just to kind of work through the answers, I think that would be a good thing to do.
Milja, it's brilliant, and you've set a raging debate going on the chat and also on Facebook, which is fantastic. So Kat, Molly, Gwen, James, Rob, Hayden are all on the case, and brilliant things coming through, which I think set up this question really well. And I just wondered, I know Alistair had responded briefly to one of the comments, but it might be quite nice just to hear from Alistair if you're able to maybe just summarise sort of some of the points that are coming through as a way of perhaps linking it to this exercise. Alistair, is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just listening to Milja and then like range of comments and chat and discussion, actual ongoing discussion in the chat forum. And I think, as Rob said, it leads perfectly into what Milja has now set up, because there's a real discussion over, what kind of social, economic, and political structures are there in the world, and can you just blame one kind of structure? And at one point, there was a discussion around capitalism has caused lots and lots of these problems. And there's a really good comment around, well, capitalism might drive technological innovation. And planned economies have also been, and I saw this, obviously, I teach on Europe and security in the Cold War. In Europe, after the end of the Cold War, there was all kinds of polluting problems from Eastern Europe. And so there was a real debate around, how do we look at these different ideologies? And then there was a discussion of whether, that they're not binaries, perhaps we're on some kind of spectrum or some kind of scale. And we need some kind of compromise, but I was just really impressed with the kind of thought that's going into this, and it does feed right into these kind of big political questions that Milja set out. And I think people are really seeing that, yes, climate change is, a natural phenomenon, a scientific phenomenon, and there may be technological solutions, but the chat clearly shows exactly what this topic is, that to get to those solutions, politics has to somehow probably work somewhat differently. And the real debate there is, what different kind of politics can we have, and can there be compromises between these positions? And there was great comments on, the discussion coming from the developed world. So what's it like from the emerging powers now, or even, the so-called developing world? It's all right for us in our post-industrial revolution phase to be talking about this. What about some of the others? And I was thinking, looking at the chat, and also what Milja had said, is the idea. And there's also this kind of short and long term. That's the big problem, and the idea of states being able to control things or not. And it just made me think. I know it's not on this topic, but it just made me think of what we're currently going through under the current pandemic, because there's a lot of discussion in international relations around perhaps the power of the state has waned a little bit, and multinational corporations, international organizations were kind of becoming ever more important, perhaps more important than the state for some people. But what we've actually seen, I think, in the pandemic is that the states have clawed back control very, very quickly. They can actually do things to their population that we probably thought they couldn't. Banning people from leaving their houses, shutting, and going back to lots of comments in here, actually shutting down the economy, where you're now actually saying, look at the impact almost instantaneously on pollution, for example. But it's not a sustainable thing to have no economy. So the discussion is raising really good comments, and I just briefly thought about it in terms of the current context we've been in for the last 6 weeks.
That's brilliant, Alistair, and it ties in exactly with Donna on Facebook, who was exactly making that point about COVID and the pandemic. So yeah, thank you, Alistair. That's really helpful. And I know there's more debate going on as we're talking, but Milja, if we go back to you, I think you were saying about having 4 minutes on these questions.
Yeah, I'm wondering about whether we should, in some regards, address some of those things and move on, but let's not. Let's stop for a few minutes, just so we can kind of work through some of those things, and then hopefully that will give us clarity as we come to these really important questions about whether we can put different perspectives together. Do they talk past each other, or can they somehow be brought together? So maybe if we let's take not long, 2 minutes, I'd say. Just to quickly think on this. Let's see if we can get some propositions on liberalism and Marxism on the table. And then I think we'll move on to some of the other, I'm not saying necessarily better, but different perspectives as well.
Brilliant. So, okay, so we'll give it 2 minutes, everyone, and then we'll come back to you then and we'll start the debate again. So have a think about those questions over the next 2 minutes. Okay, so I think that's the 2 minutes up. I know the debate's still raging. I know maybe do you want perhaps if we go across to, I know Gwen, you've been very active in this debate. Would you like to maybe start it off, Gwen, with some thoughts around around your thinking around the questions that Milja's posed?
The ones on the slide with consider, right? Hi.
Yeah. Yes, please. Hi.
So I think that from a Marxist perspective or a socialist perspective, the political challenge is more about making a transition that actually making a transition to a green economy that actually follows Marxist and socialist principles. And I mean, that's assuming that we're starting from our current situation and not from Marxism. So the problem would be avoiding a transition that just lets rich people kind of coast along and just taxes the general population on fuel and that kind of thing. So I think it will be more about a just transition than just the transition itself. Whereas I think from a liberal perspective, the issue is doing anything at all. Because if you're working on an individual level, I think it's very difficult to make substantial changes, especially if you're working through traditional means like lobbying the government or just studying to become a politician or a scientist. I think the impact would be so small and would take so long to achieve that I don't think that using those kind of tactics, action would be achieved at all.
Thank you very much. I mean, that's super interesting, and I think you're right on the money on the Marxist and socialist side. Absolutely, the key concern here is that whatever kind of transition we make, whatever kind of response we make to climate change, let's make sure that the response actually addresses the key cause of the problem, which is, as somebody else mentioned earlier, a paradigm of growth, but also a paradigm within which it is acceptable, in a sense, to not only cause power relations of certain kind within humans in society, that is, that certain people haven't got the goods and the money to choose what to do with their life, and others have, but also, in a sense, a lot of Marxists would point out that capitalism also is based on a particular treatment of the environment. The environment is kind of like a background which can be used for our good, used for our ways of moving on in the world, but actually that itself is part of the problem. We need to address that way of addressing the environment. So I think you're absolutely on the money that there's a kind of structural change, quite a deep structural change that is required. And of course, this is where Marxists and socialists, and Marxists and socialists, even within the individual camps, they disagree about what that would actually look like, what it should look like. There are a lot of different debates. If you look at the current environmental activist movement, there's a lot of different debates around these questions. Would it mean moving away from capitalism altogether? Would it mean moving towards something like a kind of a socialist, almost Soviet-style economy, which many people would argue actually was just as environmentally unfriendly as anything that we've had within the kind of liberal capitalist economy? So there are lots of really difficult questions there around green economy, what that might look like, which you can also see are actually addressed in a lot of current debates, even in the US with the Green Pact. On liberalism, well, I think you're right, and you're right to be perhaps sceptical, but I'd like to push you a little bit there, and all of us perhaps. I think liberal actors, liberals would be more optimistic than that. Is there anybody in the group that would like to put forward an argument to say that liberalism actually is the best way to address climate change, and also, crucially, to give us an indication of what it is that liberals would say that we should do about it?
Great, thank you. I know, Anushka, you were really keen to get involved, whether you were able to put that argument or whether you would disagree with that. But Anushka, are you able to open up your mic? And we'll come to some of the chats as well in a moment. But Anushka, are you there?
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Do you want me to answer this question, or do you want me to just give like a broad opinion of it?
Yeah, if you could answer the question, that would be great. Just to get the liberal perspective back into the scene.
So as someone, I'm not really that much of a liberal. However, which gives me a particular view of liberalism. But I think liberalism is solely living under capitalism. And I think that is a kind of a big fault, and has a massive issue when it comes to the challenges that climate change faces when it comes to looking at the political perspective. So with liberalism, the political challenge is probably more focused around, actually, can you live with capitalism as a society and as an economy whilst not damaging the environment? And to be honest, in my personal opinion, I don't think it can, unless you completely humanize capitalism and put the environmental protection at the heart of it. I mean, if you are talking about more early classical liberalism, and if you're looking more neoliberalism, more looking kind of, which is also new right perspectives, I think that kind of looks at a completely different angle. What kind of political action is needed for liberalism is maybe looking at how we can live with capitalism without damaging the environment. As capitalism, at the heart of it, is consumptionism, consumerism, and focusing on people's lives as individuals rather than as a whole, and rather as a society, that we can tackle climate change globally. And I feel like liberalism doesn't really solve that. And if you also look at liberalism in America, obviously that's a whole nother ballgame, whole nother ideology within itself. So our great challenge is that liberalism is broader, if that makes sense.
Yeah, your response is good in the sense that it shows that there are different traditions of liberalism. So even in this country, and certainly in America, there's kind of a more libertarian liberalism, which is very insistent on individual rights, and there is a more kind of social welfare liberalism that very much says, actually, we need to provide measures, certain kinds of protection measures within the market, for example. And we need to be able to provide free education for our citizens so that they have the capacity to vote in elections and so on. So there are different traditions of liberalism, which is important to keep in mind in these debates. But absolutely, I think you're on the how to address the market, how to address capitalism in a positive way within liberalism is an important question for the liberals. But crucially, I think I would say, a lot of liberals would say, let's be mindful of what we throw out. Let's not throw out babies in bathwaters. Just because we have an issue with capitalism, just because we have a difficult challenge for our political systems, should this really mean that we need to do away with democracy, that we should do away with free market and the capacity for individuals to actually have their own businesses, to provide for their own living and so on? And also, have we not already in liberal democracies in the UK, for example, or in the US, have we not provided for protections in the past? So, for example, NHS, which is so important at the moment, but also labour unions and a certain equalisation of wages through taxation systems and so on, are also part of liberal systems. So I think a lot of liberals would say, hang on, liberalism still has potential. We can get corporations to follow their rational interest and move into the environmental economy. That is, we actually move our investments in that sector. They might say also, yeah, we will get different kinds of representations within the political system inevitably as younger generations grow up and are represented in the political system. So some might say liberalism still provides a better answer than potentially moving towards something like a communist system or something on those lines, where we actually would throw away everything that we've achieved through liberalism. So liberals would still be on the table, and in fact, in many ways, I would say liberals are probably a dominant perspective still on climate change as we think about it today. Could we at this point maybe see what's going on in the chat? Because I don't have access to the chat, so I'd be really intrigued to hear what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of questions coming up. I mean, Jenny is talking about the link between, and she's challenging the link between liberalism and capitalism, and there's a lot of debate around that. There's also been a lot of discussion about the structures that would need to be in place. I don't know, maybe because I know that Sakina was really keen to make a point. It'd be nice to hear your perspective on the chat as well, Sakina. So maybe if we could cover those two things off. So I know that you wanted to speak, so over to you, Sakina. And then if you've got any sort of, if you could summarise what the discussion is on the chat, that would also be really useful.
Hi there. I think in general, from a liberal perspective, we do have the power to make our own decisions, and this can be beneficial because, for example, we choose what to eat every day, we choose what to study, and that can affect the economy. So, for example, if a lot of people choose to become vegetarian, to eat less meat, that changes the economy, that affects the climate in a positive way. So I think that from a liberal perspective, it can be quite positive as well. That's kind of all general point I wanted to make.
Absolutely, that's a great point. And it's good to get that back on the table also here, exactly for these reasons, that maybe there is deeper power in the liberal system and the liberal political kind of action than we give it credit for. So when we think about liberalism, we think of Boris Johnson maybe, or politicians and so on. But the liberal system in and of itself, and liberalism in and of itself, says we also have power, because we have reason and we have capacity to do something about this. So let's start from there, and then let's represent our interest within the political system. So let's go and vote. Let's do these things. Let's choose where we put our investments. If we have money in our bank, where will we invest it? Let's make our decisions ourselves, and that'll shift the system itself. I think it's a really important defense of the liberal way of looking at things, even though controversial, of course. Was there anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where, Alistair, again, if you're happy to open up your mic again, and I'm guessing you've been looking at the arguments and the discussion taking place, but perhaps you're able to give a perspective on it as well, in terms of that discussion.
One thing I was picking up on, as well as the debates that Milja's just referred to, is in terms of thinking about how you can affect change, there was quite a discussion about whether an international body would be necessary to kind of almost tell the states what to do, and whether the UN in its current configuration would be amenable to that, whether it would need reform, or whether we need a completely new organization, and then whether, going back to points made earlier by Milja, whether states would actually accept that authority of an international body. So I think that's another, and again, the political ideologies, I think, feed into some of the perspectives of, you know, to what extent international authority can, you know, govern nation states in the current configuration. So that was just a theme I was quite interested in the chat.
And it's certainly one thing, and maybe we can use it as a bridge to move on to some other perspectives too. Because personally, also my view is the key ideologies today are not just liberalism and Marxism. There are other perspectives out there that we need to also think about. And of course, let me just run away from those for a moment and just talk about realism a little bit. So realism is a political ideology that informs thinking about the international. And in the realist perspective, climate change is just one of those issues that happen. It's a difficult political dilemma, but ultimately it's very difficult for states actually to properly address it. That is, it's going to be very difficult for states to come and cooperate. And why is this? Well, for the realist, it's the case because realism starts from particular assumptions that the core actors are states. All states are driven by self-interest. As a result, there's this thing called international anarchy out there, which just means that each state will have to constantly think about what are we getting from this situation? What are the French getting out of this situation? Are the Finns benefiting from this situation? And actually, ultimately, each state is going to be playing for their own interest, always. And the realists would say, deal with it. They would say, all you climate change activists, all you cosmopolitans that say somehow that we can hold hands on this planet just because we have climate change coming, they would say, think again. Actually, what you need to do is to secure the interest of your own populations within this context. And that's actually where the effort should go. Quite a brutal perspective, perhaps, from the point of view of some, but an important perspective. And again, kind of an ideological perspective, because it comes out of a particular set of assumptions about what is out there in the international sphere and what is possible within the international sphere as a result. If you don't mind, I also would like to just mention this perspective is actually what informs a lot of my own thinking about the international politics, and that's kind of ecological thought. And I thought I'd mention that partly because, as you will have seen in the video that we watched, there is an emphasis in a lot of these perspectives, a lot of the debates on human solutions. We must decide, we must make a human global solution, or the states must take control, or somebody in the human population must come up with the human solution. What's interesting about ecologism, just as a different way of orienting to what you actually see out there where you look at climate change, is that ecologists would basically say, no. One of the key problems that we have with climate change is this ideological perception of the world as humans being somehow in control of it. That is, that there's an environment out there, that environment is somehow inert, material, background, and then we make decisions about what we do with it. Now, the key twist about the ecological way of thinking is to basically say, no, let's not treat climate change as a human problem. Let's make it a problem of how the humans relate to the world around them, how they actually even become human in a particular kind of way. So their perspective would be, think about your gut bacteria and how everything that you eat gets processed through the relationships that you have with your bacteria in your gut. Think about every single thing that you put in your mouth. That comes from and is powered by solar energy. And in that sense, also, it is made in the ecological environment that it grew in. It is not a human thing. We are dependent on solar energy, plants, animals. We are in a constant kind of interaction with them, to the point where some ecologists say we are not really even purely human. We are also kind of more than human. We are also in relations with bacteria and fish and plants and so on. And actually, to deal with climate change, we need to twist towards this way of perceiving the world. So in a sense, drop our humanist ideological orientations into the world and drop ourselves into the mesh of ecological interactions. That's another way of coming at climate change. Again, quite different, because it's a consciousness-raising effort then. To do politics differently is to actually interact with spiders in your garden differently. That's a different kind of politics from, doing politics in the liberal, in Westminster or whatever. So that's another perspective to put on the table. I'm aware of time, so Rob, could you perhaps advise us on where we are?
Yeah, so I mean, we've come to the scheduled time. So what we should really say is that if anyone does need to leave at this point, you're very welcome. But perhaps we might take another 5 minutes, Milja, just to sort of bring things together. I mean, I think there's so much that's happening on Facebook as well in terms of the discussion. So Harriet, Alex, Lewis, Abby, Amy, everyone is sort of bringing some amazing, contributions to the debate. And it might be quite nice if you're able to have a look at Facebook afterwards and perhaps respond. And there's so much happening on the debate as well here that perhaps you could have a look afterwards at some of those comments. We might email any of your thoughts back to people because we're not going to be able to cover everything. But let's maybe just take, if anyone needs to leave, absolutely fine. But maybe if we just take 5 minutes just to sort of bring things, the discussion to a close.
Yeah, excellent. And really the aim of this session was to get debate started, so I'm glad it has done that. The aim of this session was not at all to come and tell you, these are the political ideologies, this is how you should think about climate change, but rather exactly to do this. Get you to think about how you can perceive the nature of the problem in quite a different way, depending on what kind of assumptions that you what kind of assumptions you work from. So the question really I leave you with is, how do you think we should address climate change? And crucially, when you answer that question, when you put forward, for example, a particular proposition for a new UN or a new international system, or when you put forward the proposition to get rid of the British state because it cannot somehow deal with the problem of climate change, try to think about the kinds of assumptions that work in your thinking. That is really the key benefit, I think, of studying and thinking about political ideologies. They clarify for yourself the assumptions that actually do the work in your thinking most of the time, but also the assumptions that do the work in other people's thinking. So often when you have an argument with your friend or your colleague about climate change, you're not actually often even debating climate change, weirdly. You are debating ideologies. So in that sense, the key thing to try to think through as you have political debates is just be kind in understanding that everybody has ideological beliefs, but also be kind in understanding that you also have some. Almost none of us are somehow devoid of ideological conceptions of the world, and they do a lot of work in terms of what we do. So that's kind of my proposition to you as you go forward. But I do have further propositions. I in fact have tasks for you. So those of you that are interested, what we'll do is I'll post these, we'll send these slides to you, and in the slides I have just 2 tasks for you that you might be interested interested to follow up as you develop your thinking on this. And they're not directly all related to this question of ideologies, but they're also kind of related to questions of who are the new actors in climate change, and also questions around democracy. So we have 2 tasks, the one on new actors in climate change, and then another one on coronavirus and climate change, and the particular difficulties that democracies have in dealing with them. So what I thought I'd do is I'd just set out some questions for you. If you read the articles that are detailed here, you'll get the link by clicking on them in the PowerPoint slides. Write, I don't know, 50, 100 words on each in response from your own perspective. And hopefully that will kind of take this little kind of almost like a starting session. It takes your thinking further as you move on. So even though we're out of time, hopefully you will have time to kind of think on these things further, and we can pick it up in interactions with each other if you like. So email me your answers if you like, and we can have a discussion on them. But certainly I will also go to the Facebook site and the chat here after this session and have a look at the discussions there.
It's amazing, Milja. That, I mean, the ideas that are generating here is just fantastic, and I think your role as somebody who's provoking thought and provoking ideas and provoking debate, I think this last hour has really been fantastic in that respect. So thank you so much for your time and for making that happen. But I'd also like to say thank you to the audience, both in Blue Jeans and also on Facebook. It's amazing what's coming through. So really engaged and fantastic. If you are interested in other sessions from Aberystwyth on climate change, we're doing a whole range of them. I'll just post a link on the chat, and I think that will go on to Facebook too. But covering off subjects like geography, biology, economics, business, so all in relation to climate change. So really good opportunities there, and please do get involved in those. And we'd also really like to hear your thoughts on the online feedback form, and I will post that link now as well. It's really helpful for us when we're planning events, just to get your feelings about how it went, how engaging it was, how useful it was. So please do use that form and let us know what you thought. But we're going to bring the session to a close now. So once again, thank you so much, Milja. Yeah, we'll follow up with the slides and the task as Milja suggested.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it, and let's keep talking.
Brilliant. So yeah, so there's some thank yous coming through. We will stop the broadcast now to Facebook, and then once you've got the link, please do drop out from the session, and we look forward to seeing you in some of the climate change series that we're running with Aberystwyth.